Hey everyone, and welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Rachel and Dana. This week we are wrapping up our discussion of Indigo by Beverly Jenkins. We have covered plot, we've covered characters, and now we want to just dive a little more specifically into dive more specifically into topics that we covered over the last 2 weeks and add in a few questions and takeaways that maybe we didn't get a chance to discuss over the last 2 weeks. But before we start there, I would love to talk a little bit about our next book pick, which is going to launch next week, which is one of those, it's always fun when we get those Rachel and Dana crossover picks because they kind of tap into each of our particular zones of expertise. So Dana, do you want to tell the people what our next book pick is?
And I'm hoping I don't get it wrong. Okay, listen, y'all.
I told you 5 minutes ago before we started rolling.
Rachel, I told you this is my chance in life to just a little bit be an airhead. Okay, so we are. So the book that we've chosen is Cold and Deadly by Toni Anderson. And this is one of those, I don't want to say rare, but it's one of those books where it does overlap the areas that we love to work in almost perfectly.
Yeah.
It is one of those books that I can't even remember how we stumbled upon it. We both had clients looking for a same or similar thing around the same time, and we both sort of stumbled in this area. And it is one of the I don't want to say rare, but it's one of those books that does a great job of having that romance and suspense in tandem for the entire story. Mm-hmm. And for romance readers, it's a great read because or if you want to have that sort of dynamic and not go dark, mm-hmm. or you don't want to treat your suspense as a subplot, but a main plot.
Yeah.
And then I would say on the suspense crime side, I think this is a great book because it has two professionals. So it's not like an amateur sleuth, which is usually really easy to find.
Yeah.
And it is a rarity in general. I mean, I'm sure there are many, and we're probably going to stumble on more the more we do this, of the fact that it is on-page intimacy. So there are so many little isms about this story that makes it a great read, whether you decide it's your jam or not, that it does help with the balance of all of those elements without being too procedurally heavy, without having to know a whole lot of information about, I believe it's FBI. Mm-hmm. It does a great job with the evolution of the characters, both protagonists, and it is a dual protagonist story. So there's so many things that it takes from both worlds, and they hit those moments. And so it's a really great story. While still bringing the heat. It is a slow burn. Mm-hmm. And so, this is one that I'm glad that we stumbled upon it. I think it does a great job. And I think it also can be a great pick, and you may have some others to add. I think it also can be a great pick.
If you don't take all of them first, you might have all my points. I don't know if I have any left.
My bad. Do your points, right? I can save this one.
Get your last one. There are plenty of things.
I forget. And this may be one of yours. I'm almost certain it will be. If it is, I apologize in advance, y'all. It's also, I think, a great story if you're a person who you normally gravitate towards suspense, and you feel that either you need to or you should include romance in order to make your book more marketable and more aligned with what is popular in reading now. Because it is so slow burn. You still need to know romance, but it's something that you really could pick up on even if you're not a hardcore romance reader.
Yeah, yeah, and luckily that was not one of my points. So you're already in there. You're good to go.
She gonna call me out on the line, and I didn't even take it.
The last one wasn't a point. The last one. But no, this story really is like it's just like you said, it is rare when you have like a perfect 50-50 split. And this really does feel it kind of not tonally, but in terms of like 50-50 split reminds me a bit of Dead Until Dark, because Dead Until Dark was really like a perfect split down the middle. And I do think that this one is a pretty much a perfect split down the middle. And it's really good for, so I don't remember, Dana, if you recommended it to me or my client recommended it to me, but I had a client who's really looking to pull off this strong 50-50 split between, like, she wants, romance and, true romance on the page, intimacy, and like a full treatment of a crime story, not romance primary with a little bit of crime some of the time. And so this one became a really great example because we have the circumstances of the crime throwing our lovers together, which gets us off to the races to both investigate the crime and get our lovers in contact with each other so we can build that romantic tension, get them started on their arc, and all of these all of the things that you need both for romance and for crime, and also delivers a fair play mystery, which is really that's not something I think that you see a lot, particularly, and this is not my area of expertise, but particularly in romantic suspense, where it can kind of take like more of like an action bend, where this is like a true like mystery romance, like a true crime story with all of the essential crime elements, and a true romance with all of your essential romance. So I'm really excited to kind of have the opportunity to revisit this story and unpack it, and get to look at both angles in detail.
Yeah, I think what happened in this case was I brought another book to you by Tony Anderson, and then you started looking into it to just research it because we was clicking around on one of our calls, because I know one of my clients recommended one of her other books. It was, I know the cover was red, and I know I have it. I don't think I've read it. And then you did more digging and you picked that one and told me. And then I read the one because you had already, kind of gave the thumbs up on it. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a great one. And I found that it was an enjoyable read. The pacing was good. It made me curious about the other books. And so we'll go into more when we're talking about it. But I will say that I think it's also a great pick for us on the heels of Indigo, because Indigo has a lot of similarities in a sense of having suspense and having the romance, but it is treating that suspense as a subplot, even though she does a great job of keeping it present on the page as we're moving through the story.
Yeah. Yeah, this is and also it's a pretty quick read, so if you pick it up, today when you hear the episode, assuming that you listen to the episode, obviously the day it came out, but if you sort of like pick it up, and you could easily read it, I think, in a week. The audiobook is pretty good, and it's like it's a fairly light read, so you can move quickly through it. It's not as like heavy of a read in terms of like like The Whistleblower or something like that, where it sort of takes that mental energy and focus to like move your way through it. And I say that, like, I mean, it took The Whistleblower, even though it's not a super long book, it took me longer, like, to get through it, right? It's just a denser read. That's the word I'm looking for. Like, it's not so dense of a read. So I'm trying to bring some balance, so all my reads aren't just like, would you like to read an American classic? Would you like to read something that is 750 pages? Can I just take this opportunity? I would like to remind the both of us of a thing that happened early in my editorial career.
Okay.
If you'll remember, this is the most Rachel thing probably that's ever happened. If you'll remember, when we got our editor certifications, we had to pick 3 masterworks and do, do the analysis on them. And I decided, and I was looking for something that was like, ooh, what's going to be like a challenge, and what's like outside of my what's outside of my wheelhouse. And you probably couldn't get more outside of my wheelhouse and a bigger challenge in the 3 months that we had to complete the project. So we had 3 books, we had 3 months. And I thought that it'd be really cute if I chose The Agony and the Ecstasy. By Irving Stone, I think is the name. For those of you who are not familiar with this book, I believe it is at least 750 pages, as I recall. I don't have it like on hand. But it is this, and it really, it's quite a masterpiece. It's really a phenomenal work. But this is like Irving Stone does this massive biopic of Michelangelo, and he pulled from all of this historical research and turned it into a narrative form from Michelangelo's point of view, going through his whole entire life. And again, 750 pages on top of the other 2 books, one of which was North and South, which I think is 500 pages.
Which is another thumper. Go ahead.
North and South is one of my favorite books of all time. But yeah, so just like the Rachel brand of decision making on books. This was one of the books in my certification to be an editor. And so that should just set the expectations appropriately for if we've got a Rachel pick coming up.
Listen, and you know what? Listen, I get it. And that's why I try not to be surprised, and still I'm surprised. I think even as we think back on that, when I did my picks, I'm like, these are total Dana picks. Because I did The Bluest Eye, which was just, I just love that story. It's so sad, though. I forgot how sad it is. Yeah. So The Bluest Eye, I did.
Didn't you do Indigo as well?
No, I did Coldest Winter Ever, because I thought they needed some melanin in their lives. Yes.
I think, and you would be correct, by the way. As a person who, hang on, let me think. Yes, it was all white people. I had a woman in there, but it was all okay. It was untoasted bread. All right,
listen,
so we did need that. We did.
I said not only am I bringing urban fiction. So I did Coldest Winter Ever, and then I did oh my gosh, what's the title of the other one? The one with the young lady who had cancer.
Ooh, was it not The Fault in Our Stars?
Yeah, The Fault in Our Stars.
Oh, it is that one.
Yes. Girl, I was like, wow. Girl, I'm up here crying on my book. Listen.
You chose all sad picks, I think.
I didn't mean to. Well, I mean, Coldest Winter Ever is not sad. Okay. I just couldn't understand, why was I reading that as a teenager? Because I was like, ooh, this is a little bit extra. So yeah, but I thought they were great picks. They were great picks. Enough variety, add a little Bluest Eye, add a little culture, then you had a little urban fiction to shock whoever had to read it.
Good.
I got a
perspective up in here.
Exactly. Let's go ahead and round it out. Let's throw some melanin up in here. So no, you did, you always love to add balance. I think that's good.
Yes, we'll just say I add balance. That's the thing. That's the thing I bring to the table. Next year, I think we're going to do sharp objects, and I don't know if any of us are going to be the same after that. However,
look like this. Oh Lord, she gonna make me a classic reader. Oh my gosh.
Sharp objects is not a classic.
No, but it's close. It's close. It's close when you start doing. You start off with doing. You start doing some like American classics. Then you start doing some old dusty books. Then all of a sudden you have me reading those books where I gotta have a dictionary beside me or girl. Y'all listen, for the record, y'all hear me talk about this all the time. I want y'all to know that I am a smart cookie. However, in my reading, I do not like going into the dusties. That's why I stopped reading. I think it was AP English that did it to me, but whatever. That just turned me off from all older books. However, I can appreciate them once I'm in them. I just sound like a whiny toddler until I get to the good parts. And then once I get to the good parts, I'm like, okay, maybe this was a good pick.
I feel like maybe in the retrospective of like, here's what this contributed, because I think one of the keys, this isn't really a statement to you more than a generalized statement. One of the keys I think to classic literature is being able to position it in its time, and like, because it's sort of like one of those things where all art is in conversation with each other. And so when you position it in its time and place and understand like, what was society talking about at that time? What were other artists talking about at that time? What is it responding to? What is it contributing to the conversation? It makes all of those layers that feel opaque start to become a little bit more transparent, where you start to understand. So like Victorian literature, for example, the reason that, Pride and Prejudice we experience, like the reason Pride and Prejudice is written the way that it is. Now this is, guys, I am not like a literary historian, so this is going to be a little bit of like layman's. So before anybody is like, well, actually, like, we'll just take a calm down for a second here. But there was this sort of interest in psychological exploration, and so that's why the omniscient narrator becomes so popular and becomes a thing that like everybody's kind of starting to dig into the psychology of individual characters and seeing the way that they engage one another and what drives people. Like these motivations become of supreme interest in the literary exploration. And, that's paving the way for our character development that we talk about now in modern fiction of like, what is their motivation? What is their wound? What's driving them? What, logical fallacy are they falling into that's preventing them from understanding the problem or, the situation or whatever. And so these are like, the way that they pave the way for what we see as in modern fiction, I think can take the edge off of, like, it adds interest beyond just what's happening in the story that helps lighten that load of it's dense reading. So that's one woman's.
For the record, if you are listening, Dana's shaking her head. That don't make it better for me. Listen.
All right, well, you heard it here first. It doesn't necessarily matter.
Literary exploration. No. You know what? I get that in general. I think for me, this is why I always have to remember like why I like or dislike a story. I am purely an entertainment reader. I don't care about that exploration. I don't want to now listen, once I get in it and I like it, I might do a little bit of dibbity dabbity. Very little though. And mainly because I think a lot of times, as someone who had to read it a lot when I was in high school and undergrad, I got to a point where I didn't like it anymore. It never represented what I knew to be true about my life, nor any sort of depiction of anything about my culture at all was ever spoken of. And so when I found reading again, it was through the Black experience.
Yeah.
And so that gave me the lens that made me want to explore more about characters and growth. So then when I do go into these scenarios, I can glean a lot, but that's not the thing that makes me, no ma'am, I'm good. Just tell me the Cliff Notes version. And this is coming from the person who I was like an AP, like senior AP English as a sophomore. Like I had to read all that stuff and I was like, wait, what? And so when I stumbled in that store at 16 years old and found a book with all Black people, I was like, wait, what? So, but with that said, I do get it. I get it. but now that's why I'll be over here on the struggle bus. Not because a girl, I'll be like, oh, who is reading this? But then once I'm in it, I'm like, listen, what can I learn? What can I pull together? And I think it also can be encouraging to people if you're doing this. And we actually had this conversation in our DTW this morning in our sprint of like, a lot of times I'm just sort of always telling them, read more, read more, read more, because a lot of what I'm telling you will make more sense when you have it in context. So I do get that, which is why I read so much in my niche, and why I feel like I am so versed in it, because I do, but it is still a very high entertainment value because I love it. And that's why when I was surprised, I mean, I think I want to go back and do some of the other ones that we did, like Pride and Prejudice, more, because I've read it a couple times. I'm more the movie person because it just took me longer to get into it. And I don't really like books when I have to read them. So this is an exception because I picked it. We picked it. But yeah, of like going back and looking at it and looking at like the lineage. And I think, but for most of my clients, again, the other angle, most of my clients and the rate in which they are writing and moving through their content, it's actually a different, like what we're talking about is the original route, but as to today's reader and as to today's reader who has access to Kindle Unlimited, like even that's different than writers who are traditionally published, because the reader expectations and the reader experience is different. And therefore the writing experience and the story development is different. And so that becomes almost a lens, like as if I'm the iPad person when originally my first computer with the internet was on dial-up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's when you start showing your age. And so yeah, so I get it, even though gotta do my face. I want to a little bit. I mean, when I finish it, I feel like I enjoy it and I learn a lot. And I just appreciate it, because I know if I don't get something, you'll be like, okay, this is what it is. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then it starts making more sense, which is why communal reading is so helpful.
Yep. We love communal reading. Well, on that note, there will be no classics on this list. And
you can add them. Listen, I will read it. If it's our assignment, I will read it. Girl.
It's the assignment. I will read it, except I hate books I have to read. So how about we shift gears into talking about Indigo. And before we get into sort of some of the overarching takeaways that we want to dive into, would you hit us with a summary, please, Dana?
Yes, I'll hit you with it. Indigo by Beverly Jenkins is a deeply emotional historical romance set in pre-Civil War America, following Hester Wyatt, a formerly enslaved woman, an Underground Railroad conductor, and Galen Vashon, a wealthy, enigmatic abolitionist. When Galen arrives wounded on Hester's doorstep, their forced proximity sparks a slow-burning, high-stakes romance rooted in mutual respect, trust, and shared purpose. Jenkins masterfully weaves suspense, cultural history, and tender intimacy into a love story that honors Black resilience and liberation. This novel is both a political and emotional journey where love becomes an act of healing and resistance.
Yum. That was good. Ooh, the last line was like, oh, all right. Okay, so just to kind of like set the trajectory for the episode, can you give me the high level sort of takeaways that you want to hit, and then we'll just kind of walk through them one by one?
First of all, every time you tell me that, I feel like it's a setup because I don't know how to do it high level. So here we go. I do have a few, and a couple of them are sort of like will bend into some topics we want to make sure that we talk about and touch. And y'all, just be warned that this is in Dana E's because that's how I wrote them down. So let's go ahead and get into it. The first one I have listed as Write What You Know. where we really get this experience in Indigo that is really colored by the author Beverly Jenkins' experience in life as a librarian. And we see that in how the historical aspects of the story are treated. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. And so really diving into the research aspect of it. The other one that we want to talk about is probably do a little, just a touch up on the unforgettable characters in this story. I feel like this story is pre-Civil War America. This is during slavery. So we have this moment where you have a love story, and I think that can be one of those things that people think the two cannot coincide, and she does this beautifully. And so I feel like she finds a way to sort of give the time its due diligence, but also make it so that the love is the thing that rises to the surface. And I believe the way that she's really able to do that is because of the characters. She did just such an amazing job with the characters. The next thing that I have is a setting is the story. Here we have the setting, and not just the setting, the fact that this is in Detroit, this is in the North, but the setting is in the actual period of time. And also in the immediate, if we were sort of looking at this as a concentric circle, the immediate location was very pivotal to this story as well, because of how it sort of all came to be and how they crossed paths, because it would have been highly unlikely that they would have had the circumstances not taken place. I feel like as I turn my page, I feel like a news reporter, old school, had not taken place. Okay, I'm sorry. The other thing that I have is it's going to blend with the others, which I think is just like tackling hard topics with care. She does this. And I think there's been so many people, because this is one of my all-time favorite books of all time, that whenever I tell people, their first thing is like, oh no, I do not want to read about slavery. And I think she just does such a beautiful job, and that you can walk away with so much because of the way that she did it. But we can't overlook the fact that she's tackling a tough topic. And then the final thing is, I feel like she just does the Black experience in general, and being true to her audience with grace and care. And she just does that thing. I think what we do is we get to experience what we see now culturally, as was saying Black love, but seeing it even then, and then it being amplified because of not just the intimacy, not just the community aspect, but also their intention and purpose towards, eradicating something that had, totally disrupted life as we know it in the United States and for Black America. So I felt like a news reporter as I did that overview. I don't know why. Yo, this is what happens
literally every time. This is literally how we do it.
I know. I think it's because I did my notes different, and because we were recording in the morning, so I'm a little more chipper. So yeah.
Those afternoon recordings, we're just like, I'm here. It's fine. We're gonna make it.
Thugging through it.
Okay, so I think a really good place to start, because these things kind of blend together. But
Yes.
I do, because I think it was in the plot episode that, you said that you would like to see more of these stories. But of course, this is not, this is something that has to be handled with care, and it's not easy to do. And you're right, I think Beverly Jenkins, by anchoring it in, and this is a thesis more than it is this is a theory more than it is anything else. But I think so much of what made that work is that she anchored it in she anchored it in specific people, right? Like, she connects us to and gets us invested in specific people in the community itself, right? So she uses individuals and their different experiences to round the story out, and so we're invested in these individuals, and the way that she does that to communicate, right, the larger story, which is really, really powerful. So can you talk a little bit about if you're going to, be dealing in hard topics, like what are some of those considerations that writers should be bringing to the page, and how to think about, tackling difficult settings or difficult topics in a way that is, true and just, and that also is, sensitive and graceful, and all of the things that you have to juggle when you're dealing with a difficult subject matter.
I think you kind of blended that question. I think the first part of understanding, look, I would love to read more about it, but I think the subject matter itself is why we probably don't. Especially because, if I'm not mistaken, she self-published the first version, and she was later picked up by a traditional publisher. And the reality is, a lot of times, outside of, certain political times in our country where they were pushing for diversity in literature, that it was sort of this overarching push because of people pressuring publishers to do it, and then they sort of just threw out a whole bunch of stuff, and then once it sort of died down in our country, they just totally pulled back, and so you don't have it anymore. And so I think a lot of our culture and the times dictate this. But one of the things that I can say, which is why I believe I would love to see more, is because I think what she does is, because she handles this fine line so well, I think what you would do is have more people who are interested in learning more. And so what I believe that she did here is, first of all, the math was mathing. Okay. She made sure she had her facts. She made sure she had the details. She made sure that she had the political aspects or the legislative aspects that aligned with what was going on with these characters. But then she did it in a way that, this was a very violent time, but it was not focused on the violence. So it's not sensationalized. We do have moments that, the fact of Galen crossing Hester's path and was near death, that she's also didn't tiptoe around it, right? That is how he came to know her in the first place. So she didn't sensationalize it. Another thing that I feel like is that it's not rooted in trauma and victimhood, right? Both of these characters, even though there was a couple of people that were like, they probably could be the flip side of that coin, but the main characters in this story were very intentional. They were intentional about how they showed up. They were intentional about doing the things that they could do within their power to try to bring about a different type of existence for themselves and others, without it feeling like preachy or hitting people over the head with it. Like, it wasn't suffocating. Because even as someone who likes reading this, if it's too much, it becomes too emotional. It makes you sad. And this is romance. And I think adding the romance where it's the primary driver of what is going on helps to temper that and keep it from being too heavy. The final thing is that the characters are not defined by victimhood. And so it really is about how they find love. How do they show up? How do they be strong representatives in their community? Even sometimes when there's a good flex, because Galen did not come to play.
Galen loves a good flex. Let's just put that out there. There's no question about it. Galen loves a good flex.
Listen. And so having those moments, it's sort of like whenever you have a movie that's about a tense or a sensitive topic, and they have those moments of laughter, right? It's almost like it relieves some of the pressure. But the great thing about this story, I don't think you ever felt that pressure until you needed to. Until those pivotal moments. You're going into the climactic moment. You're inciting incident. Those are big moments that move the story. She made sure that it was all gas, no brake.
Yeah.
But everywhere else, it wasn't far. It was close enough where it was in our peripheral, but the romance is what ruled. And I think she just did a great job of balancing this. And I don't know of any stories that would be that I've read recently that have done this so well, which it doesn't mean that they're not out there. But and I think there are ways to even do this and have it a little bit more modernized in the delivery. But I think either way, this story could help someone that wants to do that. And so I think she did all of those things well. And I believe whether you're doing this in African American history or any other historical context, I think it's like about reading within that area in that specific niche, which I think we'll touch on a little bit. But we had an extensive conversation about that because the treatment of historical romance across some of the sub genres in those niches are different. And I think the other part is having a sense of what is your perspective as an author, and what do you want? What type of perspective do you want your readers to come to expect in your brand promise? Because if we didn't have the historical aspects being told to us and the laws that were going on and what was going on in other cities and the type of rallies that were going on, we wouldn't think this was a Beverly Jenkins book. It's a part of her brand, and this is what we come for, right? But that's not how everyone views it, and that's, again, one of those things that I think should be a very intentional decision along with a very intentional delivery.
Yeah, one of the things that we were talking about in particular, and this is a great opportunity to kind of pivot over into that conversation, is and this is what you were sort of telling me, is that that's not common in historical romance to bring us like historical fact of laws and societal workings and the overarching context, right, of the world that we're inhabiting. And what's interesting, and I think that this probably had a lot to do with the fact that Beverly Jenkins was a librarian. She pulled from the historical fiction tradition, the non-romance historical fiction tradition. So very often in historical fiction, this is a part of the writing, is giving us, and it's also the trick of the historical fiction writing, is not, giving the audience the context and helping the audience understand how this world works without hitting them too hard, too fast, with too much information that they're like, am I being told a story, or am I reading a nonfiction, right? And you're constantly working to balance that. And that's common to historical fiction outside, like non-romance historical fiction, but she brought that to romance. And so I think, first of all, that's like a really unique contribution that she made to romance as a whole. It sounds like that this is something that Beverly Jenkins does in her historical romance novels, is bring that knowledge and that understanding to the world and to the story. And so for historical fiction, I think for historical fiction writers generally, but maybe even more specifically historical romance, I think there's a huge opportunity here to do your research on the era that your story is taking place in, and really like reach into those details to find new angles of conflict, right? To really look at what's happening at this time, or even accounts of, what's happening in a specific town, journals, and, you can read nonfiction, but then also get into those. Listen, y'all, I'm going to tell you right now, primary sources are very juicy. Primary sources are where you get the tea. As someone who comes from like a history background, primary sources are incredibly fun. And you can find a lot of great stuff in there. So leaning into your research to find your unique angle on the conflict, or to add a unique angle of conflict. Like, it's such an opportunity to bring something fresh to your historical era, and you'll know whether or not you're bringing something fresh by reading right in your niche, like your niche within the historical era. And so that's kind of bringing both of those things together, of what you said before, and of just the way that you treat your historical research, to add your take, to add your sort of authorial perspective, or your authorial contribution to whatever era it is that you're writing in.
I agree. I also can say, like, I don't personally read a lot of historical romance. I have like three authors that I really like, and I read them a lot. So it's usually Beverly Jenkins. I always forget the other author's name, and so I'm not going to say it because I always mix it up with the Christian, because they're, for some reason, they're the same in my head. But she does Regency, and every once in a while I'll do a Victorian, but it's not common. And I wonder if a lot of it, and this is probably a question I should ask her if I ever interview her again, but a lot of the treatment of the historical aspects are done in such a way because it's not true, right? And in a lot of spaces and places, African American history is being, removed from classrooms and history books and things like that. And so I think I think it's another one of those moments where you can show something that you are passionate about and do it in a way that is almost like in a mass consumption sort of kind of way. I mean, in a book, in a steamy romance book. But you can have sort of this, like, and it becomes your own thing, your own spin, your own perspective. And so I would say it's probably a very fine line. I know the editor that she's worked with for a long time, she's been with for a really long time, and that has gone with her even when she's done trad and done independent. And so I think that probably makes a huge difference of knowing your brand and your editor understanding your brand and your perspective. And lastly, I think it's almost, I didn't have the words, y'all, when Rachel and I were talking about it. Like, I know what it is when I see it, but I would say it's almost as if when you are coming into this space, it reminds me of like whenever you're doing paranormal romance or romantasy, where there are layers to a thing that people lump together, right? And in this case, the layers would be the actual setting, it would be the period of time, it would be the person's a station within those things. And so taking time to be very clear about that and how that affects your plot, and of course how it affects your character's journey.
Yeah, and that's one, just like, I think an important like reminder, right? It's like, any historical fiction, by the way. So like, if you want to write research, you want to write nonfiction, that's amazing. Write nonfiction. But if you're writing historical fiction, to make sure that like you are still anchoring it in the story of the people, right? So in like your plot and your characters, and then that using all that research that you've done to come to bear on the characters and to participate in the plot, as well as the arc that the characters will undergo and the change that they're going to experience, so that we don't have two different things happening where your book is like, here is some stuff about some stuff, also here are some people doing some stuff, right? And it's like they're two separate things. We always talk about those things, right, getting integrated or melting together. And you want to make sure that, the same thing is true in fantasy, right? Of like, your world building is so important. We read fantasy because we love world building, we love being taken somewhere else, and we need to understand the context of the world in order to understand the story. But giving your reader the information that they need to understand the story, the plot, the events of the plot, and the changes that the characters are undergoing, and using your world to also bear down, producing that conflict and helping to produce that internal transformation. The way that works is the same, of how you balance your world building and how you use the world, the setting that you've created, to shape your characters, right, to orient them where they are in the world, as well as to challenge them, and to challenge them internally and externally both. So making sure that you're using your historical research and your historical setting to do that, right, to really add some gas to the plot, and to keep all of those things intertwined with each other, so we don't derail on a tangent or kind of get sidetracked by all of that great research or world building that we've done. It's easy to sort of be like, but this fact is so cool, I need them to know. Find a way to integrate it in the story, and they will know.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think what this does is also give us a great like segue into the other aspect, which are the characters.
Yes.
Hey, Hester and Galen, listen, Galen as the Black Daniel, you just don't get any better than this, right? If you just listen, you add melanin and you add a couple, what, a 1,000 or so years, was how many years between things we never got over.
He's got that Mr. Darcy money. He got 10,000 a year.
Listen, he said, don't play with me. Don't sleep on me. I believe that this is one of those moments where it's like if you're doing that dance and that line because of the sensitive nature of this topic, then you really want to make sure that I always tell my students, like, you want to stack the odds in your favor. You want to make sure that every aspect that you can nail down, that it is nailed down. And that comes to these two characters. You want them relatable. You want us to want to know more about them. Galen had this rough edge. He could have been an a-hole. He could have been a whole bunch of things. And for a little bit, he kind of felt like he was. But at the same time, it was rooted in this thing of him really being a vigilante almost. The fact that he wanted to see change and he wasn't seeing change. And so instead of sitting up and resting in his, chilling with his money and in his social status or his social circles, he decided to do something about it. And in another one of the Beverly Jenkins books, they actually talk about how they got started. And they touch on it in this book as well. But the point is, you want people that we cannot stop watching, because then you'll get to do all the other things that you really want to do with the story.
Yeah.
But we won't get there if we don't like them. And so there's that aspect. And I also love how these particular characters, you can see the connection between the angle, the wounds, the conflicts that she gave the main characters in relation to their environment, right? The fact that the way that they met, and he was brought to her home, the restraints that were on her life, the things that she had to be mindful of being a woman, living alone, hands being stained, like all these different things. And so it's like all of those things that she's sort of telling us about, which Rachel just said so beautifully, is sort of bearing down on them. And in the moment, they have to decide, right, or if they're going to buckle under that or whether they're going to thrive under that. And they chose thrive. And so these characters make it so that everything, the dialogue, the food, the activities, even down to the fact of her being in a potential loveless, being willing to be in a loveless marriage, even to even to Galen's life, right? The sort of societal norms on someone who is from an affluent family. And all of those things, what I love about romance, all of those things mean nothing when you meet your person. And we still get that feel during these very challenging times. And so they grow, they fight for their love, they earn their happily ever after. And we do not doubt nor question that. There are times, because of the circumstances, that, listen, she used the times, and his name was Shu, to show that even a man as powerful as Galen,
yeah,
because of the times, he was still a black man. You know what I'm saying? So even using that to amplify what you're aiming to share in this story. And so I think it's like, it's masterful in, I always say, like, being a person that knows how to read a room, right? You know how to read a room, you know how to navigate and know how to pull what levers when to be able to get the most from all the elements that she put in this situation. And I think she just did a phenomenal time. You get the highs, the lows, you get the funny, you get the how dare he, you get the get him, you get all of that. And you get everything. And it's all in this story. And I think that's where Beverly Jenkins sort of puts her claws in us, and she doesn't let us go until the story is done. And we want to go back for more. And so this is a great book for that. It's a great book for layers. It's a great book for even her setting up that we see them again later.
Yeah.
Right? Even down into her contemporary. They're still mentioned. So yeah, great characters.
I just want to say, one of the things that I love about, because that was something that I don't remember if it was in plot or characters, but you had mentioned it on one of the episodes, I think, or maybe it was during, like, when we were talking off recording. Anyway, doesn't matter. The point being that, like, I feel like there's this sort of like wonderful thematic communication by making that choice. And, whether or not it was specifically intentional, but it communicates this thing that, like, a true, like, real love, like, resounds through time, right? Like, it has impacts that continue to echo beyond the characters because their descendants, live a life, and so it has this thing of, like, by drawing back to her, like, by sort of pointing back to her historical fiction, in her modern fiction, there's this idea that, like, love resounds through time, and I think that's really, really quite powerful. And I think it's a good message to have, right? And to just show the way that what they fought for resounds through the ages. And I think that's quite beautiful.
I think, of course, I think it because I love her books. I think it's great for that. It also, to me, it's always a nod to why I feel like people like to poo on romance, but at the same time, like, it's the thing that keeps giving, right? It really does connect to our human experience in a way that's unlike any other genre. I think here, and I learned at the feet of Beverly Jenkins. Like, you already know, like, that's just everything about it. And I think what it does is it also makes it so that there's just this connection to these characters. And it's also just, like, let's keep it real, good marketing. It's just great marketing. You can always go back and read those other books. So she's just a very smart woman, on page and in her business as an author. But yeah, I definitely agree. The other thing that as a part of this is the fact that it sort of, which we've already talked about, and I don't think we have to go into it a lot, but it really is. I feel like she just did a great job with the Black experience at that time. I think also in being aware and conscious of the lack of information even then, and it's still true today, even though we have access to the internet and ChatGPT and all these different things, that it's just not as readily available or called upon. And I think these kinds of stories and knowing that this is sort of the stock that you're made of makes it so that you are curious and you can lean into it, or you can say, wow, I didn't know that. And so her history as a librarian plays so well. And her end notes, I mean, she's always done end notes or notes where her original resources.
Amazing. And I love that.
Oh, I love it. I always love, like, I almost want to go and turn to the back of the book. And so she did that, whether it was culture, religion, the dynamics in the community, the fact that when they were gathering in churches, when they had the secret meeting. I just love when they had to signal that they needed to have a meeting. It was done on the eggs, and a certain color told them when and where. I mean, all of that becomes this thing as someone who is Black of like we always had to make do with what you had, And so it just makes you, again, like feel very resilient as a people. And then here it becomes just a really nice, interesting, fun fact, tidbit of information that just adds flavor to the story.
Yeah.
And so that it's not exclusive. Is that the way I want to say? Yeah, it's not exclusive because you are sharing the Black experience, but inclusive. And that it can make it so that it's accessible to everyone who decides to read it. And so, yeah, she just, as you can see, I just love it.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
I want to ask one more question as a part of our takeaways, because I was, a lot of times, and this is a shift into sort of like just a more technical question, but a lot of romance, not all of it, but a lot of it is written in first person. But of course, hers is written in third person. I'm curious, like, can you talk a little bit about in romance in particular, choosing third person versus first person, and like what those trade-offs are when you're choosing like the POV that you're writing in?
I don't know if I'm starting at the last part first. I don't know if the trade-offs are any different than any other genre. I think in this case, a lot of it was dictated by the times. Like now, you may find a third person written romance novel that comes from a traditional publisher. But most novels that you read now are going to be first person. I remember when first person was barked upon in romance. Like, no, you're not going to do first person now. You can
Okay, that was
almost,
part of the development. You
yeah,
said it was in third
over
person.
time.
That's interesting.
Exactly. And I really think a lot of it had to do with the moments when independent publishing sort of rose to the forefront, which I would say probably going hard like early 2000s, still kind of the black sheep then. And then I would probably say mid 2000s to early 2010s, really rolling. And so that sort of made a shift. I think a lot of it too comes down to many of the books that were independently published that were really making money and very, very popular were in urban fiction, not urban fiction black, but like urban fantasy, urban where demon fighters and things like that was very popular. And those were first person. So things like that, I think it just was almost like an overall literary cultural shift. And it just trickled down into all the other aspects. But third person, if you look at a lot of the previously published romance novels, all of them are in third person. So what do I think you gain? I mean, listen, at this time, you're going to get third person. You're going to get head hopping. You're going to get a lot of the things that were a norm that people would not tolerate it. If you were to pick up a Harlequin or Kimani Press or any of the others that were popular at this time, that would have been normal. I think it's just the fact that now, not only is it a norm, but we have access to so much that it almost becomes this universal norm, and it's not just a genre norm.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I would have said you probably would never. And then one of the books that I was reading last week which was a new release. It was in third person, and I was shocked. I was like,
Yeah.
and it was a was it by Berkeley? I'm seeing the cover, but the point is, so you rarely see it now. And I think it's just a
Yeah.
sign of the times.
Interesting. And okay. Yeah, I was curious about that. What just occurred to me when you're talking about, the at this time everything was in third person, and yeah, it's almost like probably in the early 2000s is when we stopped seeing head hopping as being a standard in writing. Because I think about, I tried reading. I might still go back and make an effort to read it, but I tried reading Dune by Frank Herbert, Shogun by James Clavell. These are books. Dune was written, I think Dune was maybe the 60s or 70s. I'm a little bit blanking on the date on that. Oh my lord. Shogun was written in the 80s. I also did The Blessing Way by Tony Hillerman. That was in the late 70s, I believe. All of those, all like it just it really was like the norm for, it was just a part of like writing, and it was just standard. And it's just, that's gotten like kind of like streamlined a bit, where that's no like if you do that, it more appears like, unless you're intentionally writing in third person omniscient, it is off-putting generally to readers, and feels like you're kind of outside of proper writing practice. But anything before the early 2000s, that was just writing, that was normal. But what's interesting, it occurred to me that Dead Until Dark, which was published in
97, 98.
Yeah, 97, I don't remember. But it's in first person, right? So we're talking about the proliferation of third person, but actually, and then you have, one of these.
But that's adjacent to the other genre, right?
Yeah.
It's adjacent to urban fantasy. Which
yes,
is
also this is still 2001. So we actually have shifted into the 2000s. I thought it was the late 90s, but we're in the early 2000s, so we've probably a part of that shift. That doesn't go there.
Well, I will also say, and now that, like, as you found other titles, one of the other titles that I know we'll be having coming up, it actually has first person and third person, which is extremely rare. I have theories as to why I think the author did that. But I think one of the things that we have as far as a benefit in romance when it comes to that is the fact that you usually only have two protagonists. So even though it may not have been as like, it would maybe not as frowned upon as in some of the other genres where you have multiple people that they could hop to. For romance, it's usually just those. And every once in a while, you'll get a third, like your antagonist or something like that. But I think it could be done, and it could be minimally done. I have books in my catalog that are third person because that's what was the norm. So my first books in the early 2000s, those are all those whole series are third person, and they still sell. So I think it's just a sign of the times.
Yeah. So just, I want to dig a slightly more into that question. So, we have a norm, a standard. So romance primarily written in first person, but then you get the occasional, you just read one recently that's written in third person. You had a first and a third person. Are there things that, when there is a norm and you're looking at deviating from that norm, particularly in romance, I think, are there things that writers should be considering if they're considering deviating from the norm? Like, or does it, this feels like the wrong question to ask, but it's kind of the best way that I have it right now. It's like, I don't want to ask, does it matter? Because surely that decision, it must matter, and you should make it intentionally. And I kind of know what it is, for fantasy and for crime. But when it comes to romance, like, are there things that people should be considering when they are choosing that point of view, because there is a specific norm, which is first person? Does that make sense?
It does. I want to say one of the things that I think is, I always say this, and again, I may butcher it up, but I'll try not to, which is, most people have to realize, just because people write and they publish doesn't mean that they have taken classes, that they understand the differences in point of views, that they are working with an editor or a coach. Those things are not givens. So therefore, most people just tell the story the way it was in their head. They just write the story. The cost of that, I think, is the fact that if you are going, again, this is a topic we were just talking about in DTW. When you go against the norm, you pay for it. It's always a consequence. Now, the consequence may be you turn off readers because it's not in alignment with what they expect. and you are then stacking something against you as the writer that could be a barrier to them really enjoying the story. I think in romance, the differences between first and third person have a huge effect on how intimate and how close in proximity you feel to your protagonist and how much you can relate and empathize with them, because essentially you are in their head. But there are some characters you do not want to be in their heads. You know, let's just keep it 100. And so I think there's that. Another thing is that I believe that writing in first person is harder. It is harder. It is really hard to not get stuck in the I trap as someone who writes in first person. I this, I that, you know. And now, you know, the toggle between whether you want to do present tense or past tense. So I think there are different considerations. But I would say the newer you are to it, and the more that you're aiming to establish your brand, and the more that you're aiming to make your publishing not just a hobby but a career, I would pay attention to what those norms are, because that's usually where readers are going to more likely give you a chance as someone who they do not recognize your name when the other things are in alignment. And that's more of a marketing response than the actual structural story building decision that you would make. And lastly, I would say with all of that and any of the things that we're talking about, like I always tell my clients, like, keep your brand and career in mind. Like, where are you taking this thing, right? Very few people are going to just write one book. And so you don't want to paint yourself in a certain way, especially if you don't release frequently or you don't, right? This is all they have. This is the body of work that they have to represent you. And how is that representation? And so I would say that as well, which isn't directly connected to whether you're doing first person or third person, but it is in connection to your brand and what people can expect from you and your brand promise.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's something that I've been like kicking around. So awesome. Okay. So, we're just about at the, we're just a little bit past the hour mark. Is there any other just takeaways or any last comments that you want to make sure that, you get in here before we wrap our discussion of Indigo, not just for the day, not just for the week, but for the month?
No, I don't. I think we've said a lot about it, and I think this is one of those books that you really just have to experience, and don't let the subject matter be a deterrent from enjoying an amazing book. I think that if you like this book, you'll love the rest of her books, even though I have found now her fiction, like her just general fiction books, have, I think, a little bit more popularity than her historical romances. But if you even read those, they're a nod to this. So, and it's just, she is a treasure as an author. And she's still, at the time of this recording, and hopefully many, many more years to go, someone that goes and does events and speaks and does reader events that you can always, connect with. And so I would just say, read it. And then if it's something you desire to write, become a student of it. And I think treat it with the reverence that it deserves. And then, roll up your sleeve and just do the hard work.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you for coming with us on this journey through Beverly Jenkins' Indigo. Beverly Jenkins, wherever you are, I don't know that you'll hear this, but thank you for your contribution to the body of literature, and for your contribution to the body of Black literature as well. And we're just, Dana, thank you also for bringing this selection to the podcast and introducing me to Beverly Jenkins as well. So everybody, we're going to get next week, rolling with Cold and Deadly by Tony Anderson. I almost forgot the title of the book this time. And don't forget to like this podcast, subscribe, leave us a review. And also, if you, again, have questions that you want us to kind of tackle on some of those bonus episodes, please do leave them in the comments or reach out to us at storydeepdive.com. And in the meantime, looking forward to seeing you guys next week. And until then, happy writing.
Bye.